two of the largest funders in the trans movement in the United States are billionaires in China. Tens of millions of dollars, these radical organizations in the United States that are pushing the trans rights movement. So when you're dealing with TikTok, you are literally dealing with the Chinese spy apparatus. They are manipulating our young people to move them in a collective direction.
It feels like they're coming at us from every angle.
This is all part of what China calls disintegration warfare.
Joining me now, the man who knows everything about everything, Government Accountability Institute president and the Drilldown podcast host, the one and only Peter Schweizer. Peter, it's great to have you. You know, there's nobody who does what we do that hasn't been impacted by the life of Charlie Kirk and certainly the death and the assassination of Charlie Kirk. He's touched all of us in different ways, but in impactful ways. And I just wanted to give you a moment to share, you know, some of your memories of Charlie Kirk and, you know, of his activism and what he's been able to do for this movement, you know, that we all carry forward.
Well, I didn't know Charlie well, but I had been on his show several times, and I certainly watched him from a distance. And the thing, Tommy, that really impressed me about him always was he had two qualities that are kind of rare together. One is he was fearless, and number two, he was smart. It's hard to get those two together. You usually get one or the other. And Charlie had both, and he did what we're supposed to do, which is engage in dialogue. And that's what I think he was for. So it's just a tragedy. It's really led me to rethink a lot of things that I'm doing. Am I really doing all the work that I should be doing? And I think that Charlie has that effect on a lot of people. I'll also say I appreciate the fact that he emphasized not just his work and his beliefs, but told a lot of young people that listened to him the importance of having a family and being engaged and rounding out your life, which I think is great advice as well. So an enormous loss for the movement, but also an enormous loss for the country.
Right. Well, another thing that Charlie did so well is he really got young people interested in politics. You know, Charlie and I both started out very young. I was 21. I think he might have been 18 at the time. And we started a lot together and doing things in collaboration. And I remember at that time, young people just really didn't care that much about politics. Maybe they considered themselves to be a Democrat or a Republican because their parents were Democrat or Republican, or maybe opposite of what their parents were for other reasons. But what Charlie Kirk and TPUSA did is he got people, young people, interested in politics and showed them that all of this stuff that older people do in Washington, D.C. directly impacts them in their life. And I think even those on the left who disagreed with Charlie, a lot of them became engaged because of what Charlie did in bringing politics in a way that was relatable to them and that they could easily understand, and also that they could feel like they had a part in. I know that Charlie did that, but he also introduced young people to people like yourself who they might not have otherwise have found, because of course they feel maybe that people that are older than them or that are so intellectual, maybe are outside of the bounds of what they can understand. But Charlie understood that young people, if this was brought to them in a relatable way, would be incredibly interested in all the things that you and people like you have done and reported on and written about. And I think that that's also one of the things I'll remember about Charlie.
No, I mean that's a hugely important point, Tommy. He took politics to when people are younger. You and Charlie, of course, were the exception, getting involved young. I was the same way, but for a lot of young people, it's kind of an abstraction. It's a game that adults play. It doesn't really affect my life. I want to have fun. And what he did was really say, no, this actually can affect you at your core. And he made it accessible. He didn't make it simplistic, but he made it accessible to young people to say, look, this is about foundational ideas. It's not just about should the tax rate be at 28% to 25%. It's about core issues of actually, who has your money, your rights to property. He made it very foundational, and that's what I think made him such a great debater. If you watch those debates, it's almost always about first principles and about core principles, which is a gateway, I think, for people to really get engaged on these things. So there was a real genius to the way that Charlie tackled these issues, and his genius manifested itself with young people, but also I know a lot of adults, people in their 50s and 60s who listen to Charlie all the time. So he had this sort of universal language and accessibility that was so powerful.
You're exactly right. I want to dig into some other concepts with you because you're the person I turn to for a lot of information. And this is actually kind of related. One of the big things that Charlie Kirk did on college campuses is he fought a culture war or a cultural battle. It's something that he realized early on was important, especially on college campuses, but it's something that you're also deeply invested in. And a lot of people don't understand the foreign influence on America's culture. And I know that you understand it perhaps better than anybody else. So I really want to drill down and hone in on that. What can you tell us about the foreign influence on, things that are going on our own college campuses?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on. I wrote a book in 2024 called BloodMoney, and #1 New York Times bestseller, so it got a lot of attention. But one of the sections of the book I think was kind of overlooked because people weren't sure how it made sense. But it looked at the fact that, you had this explosion of this sort of trans movement in America over the last, 8 to 10 years. And what I found in researching my book on China and China's influence campaign in the United States is that two of the largest funders in the trans movement in the United States are billionaires in China. One of them is an American named Roy Singham. He sold his tech company called ThoughtWorks in the United States, immediately moved to Beijing, China. He has friends in the CCP. He's declared himself to be a Maoist, and he funds, to the tune of tens of millions of dollars, these radical organizations in the United States that are pushing the trans rights movement. The second billionaire that's doing this is actually Chinese. His name is Joe Tsai. He's the founder and chairman of Alibaba, which is kind of the Amazon of China. And he's also poured tens of millions of dollars into the radical trans rights movement in the United States. And what's strange about this, Tomi, is a couple of things. Number one, this doesn't seem to be a personal thing for any of them. I don't see any evidence that a family member is, particularly hopped up on this issue. But the second one I think is even more important is that both of these gentlemen are in China. They champion China. They champion the CCP, but they do not advocate for trans rights in China itself. They only advocate for it in the United States. And that leads me to believe that this is really more about social division in the United States than it is about, trying to advance the rights of trans people, because the situation in China is far worse than it is in the United States. And they're silent on that issue. So I think they're using this as a wedge issue to sow dissension and division within our country.
No, you're exactly right. And I think that's such an interesting point that you make because they're doing it on a number of fronts. I know that a lot of conservatives have warmed up to TikTok because they see it as a great tool. I understand that. I will personally never be on TikTok while it is owned by the Chinese Communist Party. And maybe for that reason specifically, because I do believe, to use your words, it bans what it bankrolls abroad. So not only with young people and how much they're on social media or on TikTok in China, which is vastly different than the screen time that American children and students are on these platforms, but also the content that they're being fed is much different in China than it is in America. Can you speak to that, especially on a social media front? Because I think that is where they're waging their biggest war for the hearts and minds on TikTok.
Well, God bless you for staying off of TikTok. I think that is terrific and very courageous of you to do, and I think necessary. And yeah, I mean, this is the problem with TikTok. TikTok is not just a Chinese company. It's a Chinese company that is adjacent to the Ministry of State Security, which is the spy agency of China. And in fact, the Chinese have said that the TikTok algorithm that guides the company and determines what you see and what you don't see is not just a company secret, it's actually a state secret in China. And TikTok does a lot of joint research with Chinese government agencies that are trying to figure out ways to addict young people in the West to their social media products. So when you're dealing with TikTok, you are literally dealing with the Chinese spy apparatus. And so there's enormous amounts of things that they are doing there that are designed explicitly to wage what they call, these are not my words, these are their words, cognitive warfare on the United States. Part of that is the perception of how they view values and what they value. And as I recount in the book, I have a whole chapter on it. There's a metric they go to evaluate what your values are. And they believe that they can particularly reach young people. I quote Chinese officials saying this. They can reach young people on TikTok by appealing by their emotions. And if they can get a hold of you emotionally, they believe they are now in a position to persuade you and move you politically in the direction they want to go. And this is very sophisticated. This is not, showing videos of Chinese soldiers and tanks marching down the street and thinking young people are going to become CCP members. It's far more sophisticated than that. It's about undermining the sort of traditional notions in America about the traditional family, about values, about individual responsibility, and getting them to think in a collective-minded way. And again, they use emotions to appeal to those baser instincts. So this is the stratagem. This is why I think China is going to fight tooth and nail to give up control over TikTok. I hope that President Trump holds firm. I applaud him for trying to find a solution, meaning if you can pull TikTok away from CCP control, and there is an American company that's prepared to be responsible with it, it can be a very powerful tool and helpful tool in a lot of ways for businesses. But under CCP control, you are literally giving our chief adversary access to young people in America, and they are manipulating them. Those are the words they use, not me. They are manipulating our young people to move them in a collective direction, and we know what their goals are there.
Right, and the two biggest things, I would say, socially and politically, they're amplified on TikTok are the Free Palestine stuff, and then to your earlier point, LGBTQIA, queer, everything. So those are the two things I see, at least right now, that they're really drilling into the minds of young people. And this is also very much related to Charlie Kirk, not only the work that he was combating from these influences, but also at the end of the day, his assassination. We don't know everything that we need to know about his assassination. We'll find out more. But when you see people that have made LGBTQ their religion and they are willing to in the name of it, you know something deeper is happening here. There is a much more sophisticated campaign going on for the hearts and minds of young people when they have now put LGBTQ, or this whole sense of what they call queer, above anything else. And that's disturbing to me. I want to talk about that a little bit and how you see that, because those two narratives, it's so interesting. They're conflicting narratives. Free Palestine and LGBTQ. I know the queers for Palestine think they're the same thing. They are definitely not. How is China so sophisticated that they can prop up those two concepts that are, completely separated from one another, realistically and logically?
Yeah, those two concepts are only united by one thing, and that is a rejection of Western civilization. In the sense of male and female, that is sort of foundational to the Judeo-Christian tradition. It's foundational to the way our laws are written. It is foundational to so many things. And then, of course, the Free Palestine issue, which is related to, in a lot of respects, to radical Islam, the same thing. And China aligns itself with these movements, not because they particularly have any interest in Islam. In fact, ask the Uyghurs about how the CCP treats those that are of the Muslim faith, and talk to people in the gay rights movement about how things are going in China, because everything I've read is the situation there is far worse than it is in any Western country, or that it certainly is in Israel. So this is an example of the enemies of the left working with whoever is necessary to accomplish their goals. And this is the way that China operates. And what we have to understand with TikTok is so different than any other social media platform in the sense that on Twitter X, for example, you choose who you want to follow. Now you're going to see, they're going to suggest certain things, but you choose effectively who you want to engage with. Same thing on Facebook. You friend or you follow certain people. TikTok is not. TikTok is totally determined by the algorithm. And so they feed you what they want to feed you, and they feed it to you in abundance. And the video aspect of it, the fact that you're not dealing with written word, but you're essentially dealing completely with video, they recognize and see the power of that. That's why they recognize this as such a powerful medium. And we have to understand that, and we have to address that. I would also add, Tomi, that that's sort of the air war that China engages in. There's also the ground war. Some of these radical groups that are leading the pro-Palestinian protests across the United States are the same groups that were leading the BLM protests, which are the same groups that are leading some of the very radical trans protests that turn violent. And these are groups like the Party for Socialism and Liberation, PSL, is sort of the prime example. Well, guess what? These are organizations that are inspired by, work in unison with, and in some cases are funded by the Chinese Communist Party. These are radical cells in the United States. The other one would be the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, FRSO. They pledged allegiance to the CCP. Their goal is radical revolution in the United States, and they pick these exact same issues you were talking about to try to spur violent, divisive protests in the United States. So there's an air war and there is a ground war in the streets, and they are related, and they involve the CCP in both cases.
Cultural Marxism, you're right. BLM, Antifa, LGBTQ, Pro-Palestine, all of these things together, along with the eat the rich, the socialism, the communism, all of it into one big, weird, bundle that doesn't actually make any sense. You brought up something, though, that I think is so important about China and China's influence. Now, this was a couple weeks ago, but I was really taken aback. It was on Laura Ingram's program, and she was talking to, I think it was Lutnick, but they were talking about China, and they were talking about a trade deal, and they were discussing how, allowing these Chinese students to still come to our universities, how that was still important. That might be a part of a trade deal, because without them, we would be hundreds of thousands of students short, and our American universities, some would close because of that. And Laura, like myself, was really taken aback that an America First administration would be saying something like that, like we must have Chinese influence in our schools in order to keep them open. I immediately thought of you. What is your take?
I think it's a terrible idea. Look, I understand when you're trying to negotiate a bunch of things with China, trade deals, you have the whole fentanyl issue, you have military issues. There's going to be some give and take, but this is not something I think you give on. What we know for a fact is that China has hundreds of thousands of students in the United States. We know for a fact, because our own DEA has reported on the fact, that the drug cartels that are selling fentanyl in the United States, they are using Chinese students in the United States on student visas to launder their money. We know that. We know that they are spying on Americans. We know that they are stealing our technology. And we know that they're not coming here to study political science or classical liberal arts. They're coming here to study and focus on tech and on science. So I think it's a terrible idea. I think that universities that are so dependent upon Chinese students that they can't survive otherwise, perhaps should not survive. The marketplace of American students has decided that it's not worth paying these schools $60,000 to educate them in this way. Those schools ought to fold, and they should not be relying on the Chinese government, which, by the way, Tomi, screens these students who come here. This is not a student who's in Shanghai who says, I want to go to Berkeley, and the parents say, great, let's go. You have to be connected to the CCP. Your parents have to be trusted by the CCP. The government has to screen you. So it's not like an American spending junior year abroad in Florence, Italy. This is a concerted, targeted effort by the Chinese government to spy on us, and the students are the perfect camouflage in which they engage in it. So I think this was a terrible idea. I know you got to give and take, but this is not something that they should give on.
You made an important point there because people say, well, why wouldn't you want Chinese students? It's not about the Chinese students. It's not about being Chinese. It's by who are you there on behalf of? Who are you loyal to? Where does your allegiance lie? And the same thing when they send these Chinese nationals across our southern border, people think, oh, they're fleeing China. No, they're not. In order to get from China to the U.S.-Mexico border, they had to be facilitated. They're not like refugees, and maybe in some cases, but the vast majority have been sent. Another thing I want to talk to you about, there's been a couple of rumblings of these Chinese nationals coming across, whether they're studying at universities or whether they're coming across for other reasons, but they're bringing like these biological fungus, this stuff that's like, it seems like it's out of a sci-fi movie. What can you tell us about that? Because there are some things here that could really disrupt our food supply and make us very, very sick. And those things, like, my radar goes up, like, we caught this, but how much more is coming across?
Yeah, no, that's a great point and a great question. And I mean, you're from the American heartland. You know how important agriculture and farming is to America. And this is one of the fears, right? This is one of the vulnerabilities, because we saw the case up in involving these Chinese students connected in Michigan. And there have been other cases in Florida where there have been the arrival of, let's say, new viruses or diseases that are infecting the American farm industry and our crops. And these all essentially come from China. So it's a massive problem. And by the way, China has a history of doing this. I mean, the consensus has increasingly come forward that what happened with COVID was something that was pushed by the CCP. This was not a naturally occurring event. We know that China has used biological warfare in one form or another in situations like in Hong Kong and in neighboring countries. So it's not unusual at all to come to the realization that China believes in weaponizing things. I'll just give you sort of one example, I think, that is really illustrative of what I'm talking about. You know, President Xi of China, his father was a senior ranking CCP official. He was purged and then he was brought back into the good graces of the CCP. In 2002, President Xi was the head of a local CCP office in Fujian province. And he built a large mausoleum in honor of his father. And one of the events in that mausoleum that he recounts, as a good thing, by the way, was the fact that when his father was a young student of 14 years old, that his father tried to poison his teacher because his teacher was not sufficiently revolutionary. That's the kind of mindset we're dealing with. We're dealing with a leader who believes that it is admirable that his father tried to poison somebody. So we should not assume that they're playing by any rules when it comes to what they view as this unrestricted warfare with the United States. And they are going to use these tools, any tools, to wage this war that they're waging against us. It's not a shooting war, but it's a war in a very real way that has casualties and has enormous effects on the United States.
I mean, it's coming from all angles. If you look at during the Biden administration, how many Chinese nationals came across that southern border, you look at COVID, you look at TikTok and how TikTok has really infiltrated the American mind and spirit, how they brought the LGBTQ, all right? I've said it many times. You've got Chinese students that are advanced, that are learning quantum physics, and you've got American students learning about drag queen twerking. I mean, how do we think this is going to end up in the next decade? That concerns me. But then you also have the fentanyl. You have rumblings that the Chinese government, of course, partnering with drug cartels. And we know that this has been going on, but you see it more on a sophisticated level. So it feels like they're coming at us from every angle. Then you do the intellectual property. Then you do them buying up land by military bases. I see here that you have some concern about them buying up land in New Hampshire next to a water system. Peter, now what are they trying to do?
Yeah, no, it's a huge problem. And here's the thing, the U.S. Department of Agriculture says that, well, the Chinese own 300,000 acres in the United States. The problem is, Tommy, what they're doing is they are looking at ownership records. And if a Chinese individual has a company listed in China as owning the land, that's Chinese owned. Well, guess what? What they're doing is they're setting up LLCs, they're setting up companies in Canada and they're buying American land, and our federal government lists that as a Canadian-owned property. So whenever they cite these numbers that say less than 1% of the American farmland is owned by the Chinese, the simple fact is we don't know. That's only the land that they literally are buying above board. And if you look in the state of Maine, where we did some research, and I talk about this in the book, there's lots of land in Maine that is listed as Canadian owned, that we in fact know is owned by Chinese nationals. And what they've done with that farmland in a lot of cases is created illegal marijuana growth operations. There's an estimate that was put out by the federal government that there are probably at least 300 known large-scale marijuana growth operations taking place in Maine. These are not legal, by the way. This is not, part of the legalization process where they're licensed. These are illegal, and they're really organized and done by Chinese organized crime, by the so-called triads. And those people that were slipping across the Mexican border during the Biden administration, many of them ended up going to work at these illegal marijuana growth operations run by Chinese organized crime. Why do we know that? Because in many of the cases where they've been busted in the state of Maine, in Oklahoma, and in California, when they arrest the people that are working there, guess what? They find Chinese nationals that illegally entered the country. So this is a massive problem, not to mention the fentanyl crisis. You put it very, very well. They partner with the Mexican drug cartels. In fact, the Chinese were the ones that introduced the Mexican drug cartels to the whole idea of fentanyl back in 2012. They're the ones that are kind of the senior partners to the Mexican drug cartels. So this is all part of what China calls disintegration warfare. They don't want to go to war with the United States. They know our military is more powerful and more effective. They want to go just below that surface. They want to do things that are Americans, like fentanyl. They want to do things that are warping our minds, like TikTok. They want to do things that are hostile in terms of intelligence operations, like the money laundering and like stealing our secrets. They just don't want a war, and they believe that they can disintegrate us or fragment us by doing this. And it's actually working pretty well. I think a lot of the division that we have in the United States, not all of it, but a lot of it is being fueled, and the flames are being fanned by this Chinese effort.
You're exactly right. It's a terrifying concept. Give me a little bit of reassurance as we close out the episode. I know that there are certainly some blind spots that the Trump administration has. I'm fully confident in Secretary of State Marco Rubio and others that they're working to combat this Chinese threat. But what else can you tell us, maybe a little bit of reassurance that this administration gets it and that they're going to get this under control?
Well, one of the things that's been very, I think, reassuring is, Trump said we're going to put tariffs on China, and one tariff, this 25% tariff, is going to be on fentanyl. And this is so important because China is responsible for this. They provide the precursors. They provide the pill presses that the cartels use to make this poison and bring it into the United States. The fentanyl is made in Mexico. Our federal government says there are 2,000 Chinese chemists living in Mexico helping them make this poison. The money's being laundered by the Chinese. What Trump has said is, until you put a stop to this, you're at least going to pay a price. We're not going to do the same thing you do to us. We're not that kind of a people, but at least you're going to pay a price for it. And he is stuck to that. And I think that is so important. There are going to be a lot of people in the business community whispering in his ear. I've been very encouraged so far that he's standing steadfast on that. And I think he's got a good team with people like Marco Rubio, for example, as you mentioned, that are hardline on this position. If we can hold this hard line, if we can get them the breakdown of TikTok, for example, I think the prospects are very good that we can defeat them in this battle of disintegration warfare. But if we soften, if we were to imitate the things that Joe Biden did, it would be disastrous for our country.
And at a small level, the folks can just get off TikTok. I know that there are people that are obsessed with it. It's become their life, their daily life. But at what cost? I guess I would ask those folks. I hope President Trump holds firm. They must sell or shut it down. People will find other things to do with their time. Maybe they'll go out and exercise. Maybe they'll eat a cucumber. Who knows? There are better outlets for your attention than scrolling people doing stupid dances I swear, Peter, you and I are on the same wavelength when it comes to that. We are hardliners, and I appreciate all your information as always. You know everything. I don't know how you store all that information, but I am eternally grateful for it. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Hey, thanks as always for having me. Take care.
Thanks so much. All right, folks, that does it for this episode of Tomi Lahren is Fearless. I hope that you learned a lot. I hope that your eyes are wide open and you're paying attention. You can catch full episodes of this show on Outkick and Fox Nation. Please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Tomi Lahren is Fearless. From Nashville, God bless and take care. Hey, thanks for watching. For more of my hottest takes, must-see conversations, and of course, my final thoughts, click right here. And don't forget to subscribe. Just click right here so you never miss a beat. I will be here every weekday, and I hope you'll join me.